Hey, how are you doing today? It's Wednesday, April 7th, and good day, wonderful day. I got my second COVID shot today, so I am going to turn into a superhero. I doubt it very seriously. Um, but just wanted to welcome you to our Bible study time. It is midweek, and we are starting a new book. We are starting the book of James, which is in the back of your Bible. It's right before 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, right after Hebrews. So you can go there. We're going to be in the first chapter, first verse today. I hope that you'll enjoy this study and get something out of it. Okay? Letting you know about the book of James, we first of all want to think about who wrote the book of James. There's a lot of James in the Bible. James was quite a popular name. It could have been James, the brother of John, who was one of the disciples, but more than likely not, because in Acts 12, verses 1 and 2, it says, "About that time, King Herod violently attacked some who belonged to the church, and he executed James, John's brother, with the sword." In other words, he removed his head. James, the brother of John, was probably martyred well before this book was written. So when we think about James, we have to think about the importance of who James was. And James was an older half-brother of Jesus. And we find him in Mark 6:3. When Jesus went to Nazareth and spoke, the people that were sitting around said, Isn't this the carpenter? Isn't this Mary's son and the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon? Are his sisters here with us? And they took offense at that because they thought, well, why is this guy trying to be more than what he is? We know he grew up here and he's just a hometown boy. But we do know that James was the half-brother of Jesus and that he did become a believer. James did believe. He originally rejected Jesus, and along with his brothers and the rest of his family, kind of told Jesus, you need to stop making the claims that you're making. It's making you look crazy. It's kind of making us look crazy. People are looking down on us. But eventually, he did come to know Jesus because Jesus appeared to him in 1 Corinthians 15:7. Paul writes, "Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles." James became a very key leader in the Jerusalem church and worked a lot with Hebrew Jewish believers. Acts 12:17, Peter motioned with his hand for them to be quiet and described how the Lord had brought him out of prison. This is when Peter was put in prison right after James, the brother of John, was executed. So Herod thought that was cool, and everybody was really behind him. He got a lot of popularity, and we all know the Herods were very much into being popular. So when he had that happen, he put Peter in prison. Jesus sent an angel to get him out, and he came to the house, and he knocked on the door, and a slave girl named Rhoda came to the door, and she thought it was Peter's ghost, but it turned out it was really Peter. And Peter told them all to calm down, and he said, "Go tell James, who is a leader in the church, and the other brothers and sisters about this." And he said this, and then he left for another place. So we know that James was already by that time leading in the church in Jerusalem. Acts 15:13, at the Jerusalem conference, when they tried to decide whether or not they were going to let Gentiles like you and me into the church, James spoke, and after they stopped speaking, James responded, "Brothers and sisters, listen to me." And then he spoke about what they should do. They kind of some basic introductory rules that they needed to give the Gentiles. And so he was definitely a key leader, and people respected him. In Galatians 2:12, for before certain men came from James, and that was James had sent them, Paul was talking about how Peter or as he calls him, Cephas, was celebrating and spending time with all the Gentiles and enjoying fellowship. But then when James sent some of his Jewish believers to the church in Antioch, that Peter withdrew from the Gentiles because he knew that certain people in the Jewish church in Jerusalem didn't think that Gentiles should be mixing with Jews, which is wrong. We know that there should be no wall of separation between believers. James was primarily directed towards Jewish believers, and that church primarily was directed toward them. And because of this, James is a book that is written to Jewish believers that were probably scattered under Herod Agrippa, or scattered at another time when maybe the temple was destroyed, but we think it was probably earlier than that. James is a person who is always trying to make peace. He's kind of a bridge between Gentile and Jew, more on the Jew side, and Paul is with the Jews and the Gentiles, and he's more on the Gentile side. And in Acts chapter 15, Paul arrived with the in Acts chapter 21, Paul came back to the church in Jerusalem. They'd been suffering a lot because of persecution and also because of a famine. And he had collected an offering from the Gentile churches that he had ministered to in Asia Minor and in Greece. And so he brought an offering back, and Paul came in with that, and they accepted that. We're very happy to have it. James thought it was important to show the Jewish believers that Paul was one of them and that they were all one family. So this is what he did. He advised Paul to do. When we reach, this is Luke writing, when we reached Jerusalem, brothers and sisters welcomed us warmly. Following day, Paul went in and with us to James and all the brothers and sisters, and the elders were present. After greeting them, he reported in detail what God had done among the Gentiles through his ministry. When they heard it, they glorified God and said, "You see, brother, how many thousands of Jews, how many thousands of Jews there are who have believed, and they are all zealous for the law. But they have been informed about you that you are teaching all the Jews who become believers, who are among the Gentiles, to abandon Moses' teachings, telling them not to circumcise their children or to live according to the customs." So they were saying, of course, Paul always he had a group of people that followed after him called the Judaizers, and they were constantly trying to disturb his ministry because they said that Paul was teaching things that weren't theologically correct. But we know that that's not right. Paul was teaching salvation by grace. And these people believed that you had to become a Jew first to become a Christian. And we know that that's not correct. So what is to be done, James said. They will certainly hear that you come. Therefore, do what we tell you. We have 4 men who have made a vow. And these men, Jews, would make a vow, and they would go to the church, and as part of that vow, or they would go to the temple, and as part of that vow, they would have their heads shaved. Not a good thing for Baptists, by the way. And so they said to Paul, "Take these men, purify yourself along with them, and pay for them to get their heads shaved. Then everyone will know that what they were told about you amounts to nothing, but that you are yourself and are also careful about observing the law," which Paul was. He was a Jewish believer, and he thought he ought to, anything that didn't contradict with the message of grace, that we should follow. So the next day, Paul took them in, having purified himself along with them, and entered the temple, announcing the completion of the purification days, their vow, when the offering would be made for each of them. This was not very successful because there were people who opposed Paul and there were people who opposed the Christian message anyway. So these two groups kind of got together and they threw a riot in the temple when Paul got there. the Roman commander that was right there by the temple came in, rescued Paul before the people tore him apart. And then Paul told him, he said, these people are just mad at me because of the gospel that I teach. And eventually Paul was taken to the governor, the Roman governor, and eventually appealed as a Roman citizen. He was a Roman citizen and a Jew, and he appealed to have his case heard before the emperor. And so he was sent to Rome for the first imprisonment. Paul was put in prison in Rome twice. The first time was a house arrest, and the second time was in prison. So that's how you know these things. Who are the recipients of this book? The book is written primarily to Jewish audience, but you won't have any trouble. It's not anything that's going to, it's not like Hebrews that you have to understand a lot of the temple and things like that. Because really, basically, it's a book written not only to Jewish believers, but to all believers. He wrote it to the 12 tribes scattered among the nations. They were dispersed abroad, either, again, as we said, around Stephen's martyrdom and Herod trying to become popular with everybody, or sometime around 70 AD, but it's probably the first case more than the second case. And this is a very practical book, one of my absolute favorite books of the Bible, especially to preach from. The content is that it's focused on practical Christian living as opposed to theoretical knowledge or doctrines. So that's why I like it. I think it's a very readable book. Focuses on daily living for Jesus, relationships, and applications in the world around us. Seems to encourage believers to live godly lives. So I think as we study the first chapter, you will really get something out of it. We will be studying the first chapter and the second chapter as we have our study in James. So next week, we'll be in James chapter 1, verses 2 through 4, and we're going to discuss trials and maturity, growing out of our trials. I think that will be of great benefit for you. So, prayer request. I have a personal one I want to share with you. A couple of people, the Johnson family and Fred, one of my youth that grew up. I was there 20 years plus ago, and she had a daughter, a very beautiful young lady, and she had a lot of trials and tribulations in her life, and eventually had cancer, and eventually last week passed away from that. So they'll be doing the funeral this upcoming week. Please be in prayer for them as they go through this, and that they'll honor her life. She was a believer, so we know she's in heaven, and her body is whole now. Also, a family called the Buckner family. You've heard me speak about before of Cooter, or Ulysses was his real name, but his nickname was Cooter. Cooter Buckner, one of my great friends and one of the men I really am encouraged to know that I had a part to play in his salvation. He came down front one Sunday night. He had been coming to church, and I'd gotten to know him and had become a friend of his, and came to church one Sunday night. His father, Mally Buckner, who's also went on to be with the Lord, said, I think Cooter's really ready to come to know the Lord tonight. And so I preached that night, and then Cooter came down front. We baptized him in the baptistry. Now, Cooter, big, very big guy. And his wife, Jane Ann, very small. Kind of think about if you know them, if you knew Tommy and Tommy Overstreet and Terry, about that size difference. So we were going to baptize him, and people in the congregation were taking odds on whether or not I was going to be able to get Cooter back up. And we didn't want to overwhelm Jane Ann, so we filled up the baptistry normal. And so when Cooter came in, he got in the water, and I had told him beforehand something. So when he got in, I patted him on the back, and that meant Cooter was to go down on his knees which would make him even still taller than Jane Ann, but it would make him a lot easier to get down and get back up again. So we were able to do that. And then we were able to baptize his wife, Jane Ann, at the same time. Wonderful family. Well, Cooter passed away in his sleep last week, and he's with the Lord, and I know that, and really grew to love this family, especially love Cooter. When our men's ministry, when we went out, we had no worries about anybody giving us any trouble because Cooter always took care of things, and he lived a pretty rowdy life, but Lord got a hold of him, and it was real exciting to see God work in his life. Pray for him, pray for Jane Ann, pray for his family. It's going to be a hard time. Pray for Mount Olivet Baptist Church. They're going to have a rough week. Brother Wes is the pastor there. I told him I'd be praying for him, encouraging you to pray for him too. Unfortunately, too, we have another one from our own church family, John Sheets, who plays our drums. His mom passed away, and she's been sick and has had some problems. She passed away. If you know, John has also been sick and had some bad reaction to some medicine that he had taken because of a bite. And so he was not going to be able to get up there to be with her. But Colorado is still kind of locked up. So the funeral is going to be postponed. And so plus it's a good thing for John because then he can get better. He's got a really bad fever and a lot of soreness and sores. So pray for John. Pray for comfort for his family. She was a believer, but still, even though we know her body's whole and she's with Jesus, we know the family will still miss her. Continue to pray for the Annie Armstrong missionaries. We will continue that offering until the end of this month, as we commonly do. We've got a good offering this month, but don't let that detract you from giving to it. We do need to support our missionaries as they go out. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for being a great giving church. We had so much candy for the Bunny Hop, and we're able to minister to some people and give some tracts out. And we're even going to be able to use some of that candy in some ministry to the parks this summer as we do some backyard Bible clubs and going out. And then also some of that candy will be used for many helping hands for our homeless ministry. So God continues to do great things. COVID is not slowing us down. We're going to continue to be God's people on mission for Him. So thank you for joining me today. I hope this has been of benefit. If it is, please let me know so that I know I'm not wasting my time. God bless you. Give you a good week. We'll see you on Sunday, hopefully.